an above top secret aircraft to one. As you know, the Pentyrch incident has received a lot of hate. There's a lot of haters out there that are in the UFO community, would you believe? So I'm going to start from the beginning and I'm going to show the evidence, all of it. Everybody knows about what happened, but I have to go through it. Right. These are the two aircraft that were taken in turns to circle Pentyrch in the days preceding the incident. And we've got ZG996 and ZZ418 with some rather peculiar call signs, Snake 48 and Jackal 1 and 2. So that one actually changed its call sign. But they all seem to be Luciferian in some respects. So these are the ones that are responsible. The Hawker Beechcraft is actually an above top secret aircraft, and its radar systems are pretty advanced. Now, I've got an excerpt here from David's statement. Let me get my file back up so I can read this to you, because I can't enlarge on the screen or you won't be able to see it, and that's just not good. Okay, an excerpt from David's statement. He wrote this on the 24th. 24th, woke up to the same noise as we went to sleep. Once again, stayed circling all day. Did start to wonder if we were under some sort of threat with world tensions as they are. That night, I went to bed with the sound of the plane echoing over our homes. About 11:45 p.m, I was pissed off with it, so I decided to email the local MOD a shitty email about their plane keeping me and my neighbours awake. They didn't reply to my email at all. Well, on top of that, he also messaged Wells Online. Let me just get that next slide up. I've got to keep going between PowerPoint and my files. So this was to Wells Online. You can see under here, obviously, and this is on the 24th of February 2016. And he said, "Hi, please can you find out why the RAF has been constantly flying over our houses for the last 9 hours? Pentyrch in Cardiff, it gets rather loud now and very annoying. It's like a big aircraft carrier, very, very loud. Thanks." And yet again, they didn't get back to us either. So we checked the airspace, and the airspace was completely empty. There's no mention of those two aircraft that have been circling for days, but all commercial flights were also missing from this area. And when we put in our location for planes overhead, there's absolutely no data available. Nothing. Which is a little bit concerning. We do, however, have their radar returns. This is for ZG996, the Army reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft. And you can see the dates at the top there of when they were doing this. And everything is concentrated on Pentyrch. Nowhere else, just Pentyrch. And we've also got the radar returns for ZZ418, Snake 48. And as the time approached, that circle started to get smaller. A lot smaller. And as I say, it got to about 2 a.m. when I was just about to go into my home, and I heard this come in. This is the actual E3 Sentry that went over the top. It's a NATO plane. And I will be subjecting NATO to a freedom of information to find out why their plane was here, because we do have information from amateur aviation people that have clocked this plane and where it was going and where it was flying over on the 25th. So we do have that information. We watched this plane circle 7 times. And as you know, Pentyrch is in an elevated position, so you can see in every direction but north, because that's where the actual mountain is. And on the 7th time around, when red light became visible high above the fields. So I'd called for Donna, one of my other neighbours who was watching with us that night. I didn't get an answer. I called a second time, still no answer. So David and I ran over to the 5-bar gate to get a better look at what was going on. And one red light turned into 3. It didn't split, it was followed by, and then on its near side edge, this emerged. Now this isn't accurate because the pyramid was actually tipped towards me, so you couldn't see its underside. You could see this string of lights, and a few on that side. And it was this corner that was closest to the ground as it was tipped forward, turning very slowly anti-clockwise. And when it was in the upright position, it's fired this really bright green strobe out at the top. I don't know what it was, this UFO, that's moved across to my left-hand side just above the trees. I just stayed there rocking backwards and forwards. The pyramid was still turning anti-clockwise, and this right-hand corner got closest to the ground. And I stood on the 5-bar gate to get a better look through the bare trees and said to David, "It's landing," thinking it was coming down, when in reality the ground there rises, and that is the foot of the mountain, so the ground was actually coming up to meet it. And it ejected this hand of lightning, and the whole thing lit up. Brighter still on the right-hand side, like that right-hand string of lights was the steering mechanism for this thing. And you could see around the brightest lights that it was indeed a solid craft and not a string of lights. I heard 2 military planes coming. I didn't know what they were. I looked up just to see them go over the top. And when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore. Now that's not to say it wasn't there. I just couldn't see it because it's pitch black here. There's no street lighting or anything. 2 further planes came from my left-hand side. I now know to be, thanks to Gary Jones, who's done a fantastic investigation, to be C-130 Hercules aircraft. And they've gone back in behind the 2 C-17s. And they were flying towards where the pyramid was last seen. What's that? Hi, cows, I was at the Royal Grand. Really? You'll have to PM me. That would be great. Please send me a message. The green object that had been above the trees had moved across and in front of these aircraft and fired 3 really bright strobes at them. And then I described like it got excited and it skipped and bobbed in a zigzag kind of way or away into the distance with the 4 planes following it. And it bathed all of those planes in green light. That's how bright it was. You could see the outline of all their engines and the fuselage. And I watched it till I couldn't see it anymore. Afterwards, David and I were approached by these 2 barrel-shaped objects. Completely silent, no downdraft, no noise, no nothing. And they were just capped on the top and on the bottom with black caps, and the sides were completely smooth, as if they were made of glass. And all the insides were moving. And the one stopped above the hedge, about 20 feet away from me, and about 20 feet up. And I stared at it just for a few seconds because I wanted to see the details. I was looking for writing or anything, and there was nothing, just the insides moving around. And I looked to see where the second one was, and that hadn't stopped. And by that time, that was literally over the top of me. And the only thing I could think to do was to wave. With all the military activity, I didn't want us to be hostile or appear to be. And it changed colour from red to green. And I felt it scan me. It was the only thing I couldn't be tested for when I took my polygraphs, because it was a feeling. And I heard a man's voice, not my voice, tell the world what you witnessed here. And I said, I will. The green barrel moved away to my right, across the rooftops of the houses, and the red barrel that had remained sentry the whole time moved away to my left-hand side and low across the fields. David had said he'd saw 15 or 20 of these objects come out of this pyramid. I didn't see any of those because I was so fixated on it touching the ground. But we walked down to what we call the second field where this pyramid thing had come in, to see if we could see any more of those. By the time we got there, there was nothing to see. We heard the military helicopters coming. There were 3 Apaches, one above 2. You could see their red lights, infrared lights, pulsing out in front of them. And you could see the hedges and things being pushed flat or being moved anyway, by the force of their rotors. We watched those move from my left to my right on an interception course where that first green object had gone. And when they were out of sight, we've run around the houses to get a better look to see if we could see up the valley past the mountain, but by the time we got there, they were already gone. We went back to my home, and David and I were polar opposites. He was still trying to make sense of everything, and I was, almost frantic. I needed to tell anyone, what had happened, because I wasn't into UFOs. This wasn't part of my life, An interesting fact is at the moment that pyramid emerged, the temperature dropped by a full 5 degrees. And you can't make that up. A full 5 degrees. And anyone that's ever been up and stayed up all night will know that 4 a.m. is normally the coldest time before the sun comes up. 5 degrees, and then the temperature started to rise back again. Now, the next morning, I don't know, I went to bed and I heard the explosion, okay, and it's not a small bang, it was an enormous explosion. And I don't know how, or when I went to sleep, I just woke up with David hammering on my front door, showing me this. How terrified neighbours in a country village wake during the night to the sound of explosions and fighter jets. The interesting line is villagers were terrified when they awoke to sounds of explosions in the sky. Now I need you to remember that. In the sky, not on the ground, okay? Wales Online also put out their cover story, how military planes and helicopters kept parts of South Wales awake in some kind of training exercise. It wasn't an exercise. And I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs. So I've immediately launched into a comment, and this is what I said. This is my comment on the day. Thanks for sharing this, but I can categorically state this was no exercise. Last night I saw absolutely everything, and what they were chasing were not planes. I will take a lie detector anywhere for anyone, but what I witnessed last night will stay with me for the rest of my life. What is more, the military knew they were coming and had a spotter plane in the air for 2 days waiting for the event. And when it came, 4 planes chased the green object, whilst the spotter plane circled approximately 6 red oval objects which formed the pyramid shape. Several red spheres hovered silently above the fields until the helicopters came. Now the military were in at ground level from the off. And one of these military personnel, using a fake Facebook profile, one of my debunkers, called himself the Smoking Man. But LOL, good one. Bless him. Well, he was having a bad day because I like a bit of sarcasm. And so I decided that I've lost my slides. You'll have to bear with me. I'm going between files here. And I answered him. Apt, you should use the name The Smoking Man. We get back onto that. After all, isn't it his job to debunk real events? Answer this. When did they use live ammunition in an exercise in a residential area? Answer. Never. And one other thing. They may have chased and shot down the green object, but they didn't get the red ones, did they? Because they were all still here. And then his mate, Agent Fox Mulder, also using a fake Facebook profile, he decided to get involved. Actually, it's my job, which is what he said. I don't know if I'm not even going to attempt to drag that slide up in case it goes off. Anyway. There were other comments on Wales Online that morning from people that had experienced the explosion and all the helicopter noise. I'm assuming this was your chopper that kept me up for hours on end. What's going on? nightmare. There was an explosion at 3ish, and at one point there were 3 helicopters. And somebody else said, is there something else going on over Pentyrch and Common at the moment, 4 a.m.? 3 helicopters circling for hours, keeping us all awake. But there were others on X that were also making comments. And so Pentyrch and Common really was going to be my starting point at the other end, because I wanted to find the impact crater. There were more comments. What went off on Pentyrch and Common at 4 a.m? 2 helicopters landed for ages and then took off again, then circled around for ages. I heard them too. It was 2 explosions, some sort of military exercise. There were Chinooks, Pumas, and Apaches flying. But the interesting comment is from Wales Online. And they made this comment at 3:39 in the morning on the 26th of February. That they were still currently working on a story about this, and they would post the link as soon as they have it. Interesting. So I went to Pentyrch and Common because, well, first of all, we actually went down to the field where this pyramid had come in, and it was snowing just in that one field, which was bizarre, but we didn't stay there for very long. I wanted to go to Pentyrch and Common. I wanted to find the impact crater. So I went to Pentyrch and Common, and this is what it looks like. And Smilog Woods is in the distance over there. And yellow tape had been tied to bushes and trees in some form of grid pattern, as if there had been some kind of metal search. All the old metal that had been on the common for years was neatly stacked up along the roadside, and that included old washing machines and push bikes, you know. And just so that you get an idea of the trajectory of this thing, Pentyrch is right over here on the right-hand side, and in a straight line flies over Pentyrch and Common, over the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, and then into Smilog Woods and into the crash site there. And this is important because they actually felled these trees here, and there was no need for it. But I'll get there, because there's an awful lot to get through, so I hope you've got your popcorn ready. I stopped and spoke to 2 dog walkers on Pentyrch and Common who told me that the first explosion was an air explosion, and the second one sounded like something hit the ground in Smilog Woods. Well, because I wasn't from that area, I felt really stupid when they pointed to that huge hill that you just saw in the distance. And I decided there and then I was going to go. I needed to find the impact crater. I knew in my heart that they'd shot it down. Stephen was with me, one of my friends. And when we got there, it wasn't long before we started to find the beginnings of the debris trail. Huge branches. As you can see, nothing grows on the forest floor. Nothing, because no light penetrates that far. These branches came from the tops of the trees. And whatever this was came in at altitude at an ever-descending height. And these branches had been snapped off. We got halfway through the trail. Excuse me. And I was exhausted. I needed a drink. I said to Stephen, look, let's go back and tell the others what we found. And that's exactly what we did. We spoke to David and Donna, and we hatched a plan to go up the very next morning to follow the debris trail through to its end and find the impact crater, and that's what we did. And this is what we found. Huge trees, these trees are 60 feet tall, have been snapped off mid-trunk. Whatever hit these trees hit it with some force. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, we've had fatal car accidents, and my heart goes out to their families, but, they hit a tree, but the tree didn't snap. It takes an enormous amount of energy to snap a tree like this. But there were 6 trees, all snapped to the same height. And I'll stop this before it goes sideways because it's quite difficult to view. And there's a lot more to show from this crash site. And you can see they're freshly snapped. Whatever went in there went in at speed and at altitude. So I'll just pause it there. The same yellow tape was tied to the trees in Smilog Woods around this area. And here are some more images of the crash site. Look at the bend in this tree. And all the trees snapped off at the same height here. You can't really kind of get the scale of how high these trees are. But they're at least 12 to 14 inches thick. And they're snapped. As David stood in the middle of this crash site to try and give you some perspective as to how big these trees are. And again, huge branches. These are not small branches. They're really quite thick, have been snapped off in this crash site. An image of one of the trunks of those trees. You can see how thick they are. And they're shattered. They're not cut. They're snapped. Like a twig. The tops of the canopies were out on the trees that were left standing. These canopies have been snapped off. And some of the trees here lying down on the floor, so you can get an idea. I mean, this is a road here. And I think we all know how big a road is. It's not a footpath. To give you an idea of how big, there's two trees in this photograph. Healthy trees. And also images of the other trees all snapped off at the same height now. Now whatever this was hit these trees and has come out into the brambles around the outside of the forest. Nothing grows, as you've seen, on the forest floor, but brambles do grow around the outside. Because of the EMF, and I'll get there, what was found here, we believe that it's hit these trees and either the military have pulled it out onto the floor or it's bounced out onto the floor. There were these extremely strange burn marks on the trees all the way around with scuff marks on the bark, and all at the same height, all at the same level, and quite pungent smell in the air, described like sulphur or fireworks. But another interesting fact was it was snowing at the crash site too. And I do have a small video of here, taken on the day. You can see how freshly snapped these trees are, look. That it was snowing in the crash site. And it wasn't normal snow. The snow had a resistance, a bit like a beanbag ball. And you could squeeze it between your fingers and it would stay on your thumb and then it would dissolve. It wouldn't melt. You can actually see it on the floor. It was bizarre, to say the least, as if seeing a big pyramid UFO isn't bad enough. This happened. This was real. And the interesting thing is, I do have the weather for the 25th and 26th of February 2016. And the weather was not conducive with snow. The temperatures were too high for there to be snow. There should have been sun and cloud. No snow. And another unusual thing. This is taken from the crash site video. This is my hair. This is my hair on the morning of the 27th. That turned completely white. Overnight. A little bit shocking, to say the least. Now I want to get into some evidence of explosions. Let me just find my file a second because I'm going to have to read some stuff. Where have my files gone? Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't know if I can take that down. No. Okay. Evidence of explosions. Here we go. Apologies, guys, because there's an awful lot to get through. Okay. This is a statement. Linda Moulton Howe was the first person that I ever spoke to about this. And I didn't really want to speak to anybody. And she received this after the show. Somebody had written into her when she spoke about the case here in Pentyrch. And this witness wished to remain anonymous, and I highly respect that. And he said, or she said, "Hi Linda, I was listening to your very recent 21st of December 2017 Coast to Coast radio show which included yourself talking to Gary Jones about the incident of high strangeness in and around Llantrys in South Wales. I was on duty as a nurse at the hospital at the time, February the 26th, 2016, and I can explain what I experienced. I must add, I no longer work at the hospital anymore, and I'm in fact no longer working for the NHS or the National Health Service. And it is only now that I can contact you regarding this matter. I believe it was around 2 a.m, editor says. Others say that it was later, when I heard an extremely loud explosion which sounded like it was right outside the hospital. It was then followed by a smaller explosion which also sounded a little distance away from the hospital. I was on duty with 2 other people who heard exactly the same as myself. I have combat experience in the British Armed Forces, and I can tell the difference between a bang and an explosion. After hearing these explosions, I automatically thought that it was a terrorist attack, as is a sign of the times that we are unfortunately living in. I also contacted hospital security to find out if they were aware of what was going on. Suffice to say, they had no idea what I was on about. It goes on 1 second, please. There's a second half to this. Oh my goodness. Right. I then went outside the hospital to the entrance, and smoke that was all around resembled a very foggy night. And it is correct that the smell of sulphur was all around. I didn't see any lights, but then again, I wouldn't have seen them due to the smoke. I did, however, hear a lot of noise sounding like aircraft and also helicopters. I had to go back into my workplace very shortly afterwards, and that's where it ended for me. I phoned security again, asked them if they'd had any information concerning what had happened, and they told me that there'd been a military exercise, and that was it. I don't believe it was a military exercise at all, basically for the same reason as Gary Jones. A member of staff informed me that all the roads were closed in the local area. All the roads in the local area were closed by the police, and I can assure you they must have drafted in police from outside the area, because with the cutbacks in the police force, there are not many on duty at night, and they number around 10 constables and a sergeant in that area. The only mention in the media was of a military exercise, and this was on Wales Online News app. The media here is the same as the rest of the UK in that it has its own narrative and agenda. And he does give a description of where he was in the hospital that night, and that is on a map that I will show you later. More evidence of explosions. This is from a lady whose father was in the Royal Glamorgan Hospital that night, who was a veteran. And there isn't much to read, but I do want to get the slide up so that I can read it to you. Let me move that across so I can see. Okay. Moira blank because her name's been redacted. My dad was a patient in the Royal Glamorgan Hospital on the night. It's gone off the screen. And he heard a lot of gunfire, aerial activity, and then a huge bang that shook his hospital bed. He lived through the war and was an armourer in the RAF. So he knew what he was hearing, and he said it was quite unnerving. I was a patient in the hospital. I'm moving across on my slides, and I should be moving across on the presentation. Apologies, guys. So we also have this witness statement, again from a member of staff at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. And these statements are important because they were there. And this is what they say. Matt C., who worked at the hospital, about the explosion. I was working a night shift at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. I can't be certain what time it was exactly, but there was a loud bang that shook the whole hospital. I ran to the window, for I thought something had crashed into the side of the ward I was in. Shortly following, the smell of like sulphur was coming through the vents, which seemed to linger all night through the corridors of the hospital. I went outside to try and puzzle what had happened, and smoke seemed to mist through the air, seemed to come from towards the common, or at the time I thought a factory might have had an explosion of sorts. There were helicopters circling right throughout the night, from the early hours up to about 6-ish maybe in the morning. The only explanation we got later on was from the news that the army were on a training exercise. And I need you to remember that. This is a member of staff saying that the only explanation they got was from the news that there'd been an army exercise. And that's important. You'll see why as I go on. Okay. Next. And I've just read Moira's. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. Okay. So shortly after the explosion, and just a few minutes after the explosion, an Apache helicopter had to do an emergency landing at Cardiff International Airport, where you wouldn't expect to find an Apache helicopter, let alone that civilian airport. And the time of the explosion, when we wrote to National Geographic to give us the seismic readings for that night, measured on the Richter scale, 40 miles away in Monmouthshire. This was not a small bang. Now, there is a lot of noise in the daytime, everything from quarry explosions that you can see here, and roadworks, traffic noise. But at 4:21 in the morning, there was nothing, and we asked them what caused this, and they told us that whatever it was must have been man-made, and the only thing going on that night was the military. Well, Richard Hall, who I went to see, asked the Ministry of Defence. Now, all of these documents have a reference number on at the top here. You can write this reference number down and go to a website called whatdotheyknow.com and type in that reference number, and it will bring up the Freedom of Information, and that applies to all the Freedom of Information I'm going to show tonight. He asked the Ministry of Defence what targets were fired upon during the operation, and what caused the 2 loud explosions that were heard by residents. Move this across a little bit so I can read it. 1 second. Okay. And they said no live ammunition was used, therefore no targets were fired upon. The explosions were controlled detonations of simulated munitions. Remember that. Simulated munitions. I'd like to see them place one in the air, but we'll get there. We also asked the Ministry of Defence. Oh, this slide's... Leave that up if I can, because you can't really see it. Oh. No? Okay. Can't see it, no. You can. Can you see the very bottom of it? Why was a meticulous metal search carried out in the early hours of the 26th of February 2016 on Clantrison Common, and what were they searching for? And the MOD's response was that it was all withheld under Section 26. Well, when Gary Jones got involved in the investigation, it was noted that all of the trees that were damaged in the debris trail had been felled, because the crash site is up here, look. So I asked Gary to contact National Resources for Wales and find out why they felled these trees. And he wrote to them, and they said that they were undertaking the felling of larch infected with Phytophthora ramorum, which is larch disease, and it's a very harmful pathogen that is and has already infected over 150 different varieties of trees and plants, and we don't have a cure for it. So there are very strict policies around how to deal with this stuff. What? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll go slower so you can read it. Anyway, they told us that they had a plant health notice. Well, rather than ask National Resources for Wales for that plant health notice, I found their management strategy meetings for all plant health notices that had been issued in Wales from 2010 to 2018. And I did say before, the map looks extremely busy, but it's all colour-coded for the years. And the colour that we're looking for 2016 is this nice light orange colour here. The lower right-hand side of the map, and you can see a road here called the A4119. And on that road, and I've pinpointed it up here at the top right-hand corner, is the location of the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and Smilog Woods. And would you believe, in those 8 years, there hadn't been a single plant health notice issued on Smilog Woods for larch disease. But I wanted to find out more because I know the truth. So there had to be a reason for them felling these trees. Well, this is Smilog Woods, and the brown areas on the map on the left are the areas outlined for felling. The map on the right, the picture I should say, is of the crash site and the debris trail. The circle is also on the map on the left, and that area was never outlined for felling, but they felled it anyway. They felled it because the trees were damaged. Now, one of the things they have to do is what they call a sanitised felling. So all the felled wood must be removed by a licensed person immediately to avoid breaching biosecurity. They must wash all their equipment. Every precaution must be taken so as not to spread this pathogen, including erecting warning signs. And they must leave the land free and fallow for a minimum period of 3 years. Well, I found a place called Lickey Hills in Birmingham in the UK. And it used to be this beautiful woodland walk where people walked their dogs and had picnics and took their children. And unfortunately, they really did have larch disease. And they turned that into this. A complete and utter barren wasteland. And they also erected warning signs. And they said we would ask our visitors to help us in our efforts to stop this disease from spreading by observing any closures and cleaning your shoes, wheels, and dog's paws so this pathogen isn't carried off site. Dog's paws. Every trunk, every branch, and every twig has been removed. The only trees that have been left standing are Douglas firs because at this point they're still immune to the disease. And that's what they did in Smilog Woods. Does that look like a sanitised felling to you? And I've highlighted all the new saplings in these clay-covered hills. So they'd replanted it already in amongst all of this debris. That's not a sanitised felling. Well, I want to get into some of the EMF evidence, and I'm not very good at this. Gary Jones is the person that can really explain it, but I just want to show you what was found and try and explain it as best as I can, so forgive me. These are the fields of Pentyrch. And let me move this over just a little bit, if I can. And these are all the EMF results that were found. Now, we'd explained to him as witnesses where this pyramid had come in, how it had turned, and where it had went before it disappeared. Now, at the top here, on the right-hand side, you see a blue line with 2 dots, and that's where the barrels were. And you can see the results at the top here. 0.45, and then all of these are not all, but these are some of the results. They go up, 0.63, 0.51. Some of them are really quite high. And this EMF was also found at the crash site through the debris trail. and into the crash site. And all the readings are there for you to see. Again, there's some down along the roadway here which are the highest, which is why we think that the military has pulled it out and either stacked up the debris that was found along here and took it away in trucks, but I'll get there. And then 0.59, 0.52, these readings are really quite high. So what Gary did was he put all of the readings that we had and worked out an average for us. I do have to move this across because I can't see it. Okay. And the average came out as sort of 5.2 or something for all of them. And this is measured in milligauss, or microtesla, I should say. So 1 to 25 milligauss equals 0.1 to 2.5 microtesla. Okay, that's how it's calculated. So 1 to 25 is microwave oven level. And this is 20 months after the event. According to building safety specialists, they do not recommend that you're exposed to or more than 1 to 1.5 milligauss. But our average worked out at 5.2 milligauss. And anything over 5 is of extreme concern. Not a little bit of concern, extreme concern. Now, we've got a lot of photographic evidence. I've included some here, but this hedge is where that red barrel was. And as you can see, it goes brown and then yellow and then back to green. And the same on the other side of it, brown and yellow and then goes back to green. This hedge took years to grow back because the EMF still registered at 0.47. Anything over 0.4 is dangerous to human beings. And the same in the crash site. 0.44 was being found in the crash site 20 months after the event. So how high was it on the day? Now, after the event, we had these strange men and women come and camp in the fields. And some of you would have seen these photographs before, but if it weren't for these photographs, there would be no evidence these people were ever there. And I mean ever there. And they used civilian tents, and they used civilian vehicles, and some of them dressed in civilian clothing. But they didn't behave like civilians. Now I knew why these people were there, because I saw the incident. And Gary wanted to go straight in for the kill, and I said to him, now, first of all, I need you to find out if there was any planning permission for this campsite. So we wrote to Cardiff City Council, were any applications granted for anyone to use this land in the Pentyrch fields beginning between the 1st of January 2015 and the end of December 2016. So we gave them 2 full years. And would you believe? There were no applications for enforcement searches, no application for appeals, and no applications for surveys in that land. So we asked the Ministry of Defence. Again, this is off the screen. Can you see the bottom of that slide? Ooh, ooh, ooh. No, that'll do. So people can see it. Again, the reference numbers are here. And writing to request information regarding a military exercise that took place in the fields of Pentyrch, adjacent to Tinnycoid Road, and the rear of the Sarn estate between the 1st of February 2016 and the 30th of April 2016. Local residents were told they were conducting a military exercise in case of an emergency situation. Why were the residents not told the military were conducting an exercise there? And the military told us they held no records within the scope of our request. So they deny even knowing who these people are. So we asked them again. Why did you send a clean-up crew after the event? What were they searching for, and why were they carrying guns? And the MOD says, as stated in the MOD's response dated 24th of October 2018, no information is held in the scope of your request. A further search has been conducted, and I can confirm the Ministry of Defence does not hold the information in the scope of your request. That's the second denial. And the reference numbers are at the top there if you wish to look them up. And this is 3 in total, freedom of informations. So again, we ask them, if this was just an exercise, why use the field to Pentyrch when Bridge is just up the road and is MOD land? And why were the residents not notified this was happening in advance? And then they changed their story. I'll try and get this on the screen because it's slipped down, but it does say, as stated in the MOD's response dated 24th of October, some of the information is held in the scope of your request. I'm going to have to move it up. This information is withheld under Section 26. But they didn't actually say that some of the information was held. They said that I have no information. So that's the third contradiction. So we asked the Joint Forces Command. Surely they would know something, you know. We asked, why were the soldiers carrying automatic weapons that did not have a yellow cap in the end of the barrel, implying they were carrying live rounds? Information is withheld under Section 26. However, under Section 16, duty to provide advice and assistance, you may wish to be aware that the military personnel were issued with blank simulated ammunition for this exercise. Men wearing forensic white paper suits were seen searching the field, so if there was a risk of contamination to the team, was there not also a risk to local residents? The MOD holds no records associated with this training exercise. No exercises have been listed for these people. I'm going to have to move this up because the bottom one's quite important. Why were the military in the fields of Pentyrch during this time? Not Vodafone, not a fracking survey team, the military, who were armed, and this information is withheld under Section 26. Well, we sent in 3 freedom of informations in total on this. The numbers are at the top. And we asked, if this was just an exercise, why did they lie about their identity and give a fake cover story as to their presence, and what were they doing in the fields of Pentyrch? When approached by local residents, they impressed upon them that they were civilians, even though some were dressed in military attire. No planning permission had been granted for this campsite in those fields, but they were civilian tents and vehicles and not military. Again, I ask, why did they lie about their identity if this was just a military exercise? I have to move this across because my slides have slipped for some reason. A new search, this is their answer. A new search for the information is now being completed within the Ministry of Defence, and I can confirm that some of the information is held in the scope of your request. However, all of the information falls entirely within the exemptions provided for Section 26 Defence. Well, I knew this couldn't be right, and I found this wonderful document called Training Over Private Land Act by the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, who are in charge of the Ministry of Defence. And I love the Ministry of Defence because they have standing orders, they have rules and regulations, and you don't break them for anyone. The first thing I went to was identification. Oh yeah, that's gone off the screen a little bit, hasn't it? Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go and find it in my files. 1 second. Because I've got a little bit of reading to do, so I might as well. Got it? Yes, identification. Training over Private Land Act Section 26B. Prepared to ignore standing orders and their duty. All members of the services must disclose their identity and that of their unit if asked to do so by landowners and officials of National Parks and Forestry Commission. It may not always be possible for landowners and officials to be readily recognised, but any persons questioning service personnel on private land must be assumed to have a valid reason for doing so. Therefore, the utmost courtesy must be extended to them. Parties of service personnel or individuals are not to avoid any person attempting to question them. But they did, and they lied. So I wanted to know what else they're supposed to do of an exercise of this magnitude. And the Training Over Private Land Act, Section 15, spelled it out very nicely for me. Ministerial brief. There must be a ministerial brief in advance about large-scale military exercises involving extensive areas of the UK, including training over private land. The submission must include the period of the exercise, including weekend activities, the time of the exercise, including any night activities or driving over bank holidays, the number of troops, vehicles, helicopters, outside vehicles, for example, armoured vehicles and self-propelled guns, any intensive out-of-hours helicopter and fast jets activity, any foreign forces involved, details of open days and media briefings, how the exercise might affect the general public, and a draft letter for the Minister to be sent to members of Parliament and members of devolved legislators whose constituents are likely to be affected by the exercise activity. Right, well, we knew where to go. So we contacted the Welsh Government. 1 second, let me just take a drink. It's a lot of reading to do. And the Welsh Government told us that they neither manage military exercises in Wales, nor do they hold a record of military exercises in Wales by date, so they weren't able to provide any information and suggested that we went to the Ministry of Defence. So the Welsh Government didn't know. So we went to local government, because according to their rules and regulations, they must be told. We asked the council, did the council have prior warning that the exercise was taking place, and if so, how much notification was given? And they answered, we refer to your Freedom of Information request in respect of the incidents on the night of the 25th and 26th of February 2016, which involved the supposed military exercise, which took place in the area around Llantryston Common to Pentyrch, an area in which the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and the Royal Mint are located. The authority was not made aware of any exercises in those areas, in that area on those dates, and is not aware of any council property being damaged. So there was no letter sent out to them. And we certainly know that there wasn't a press briefing, because Wales Online was still working on a story about this at 3:39 on the morning of the 26th of February. Well, we asked South Wales Fire Service, surely they must have been told something, and it's gone off the screen. I'm so sorry that these slides have slipped. We were requesting information related to military exercise codename Chameleon, allegedly, that took place between the 25th and 26th of February 2016. Rather than read it all, we basically asked them if they knew anything, and they wrote back to us and said, following an investigation, the service holds no information in relation to the matter detailed in your request. So the fire service didn't know anything either, bearing in mind there are huge explosions going off. So we asked the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. I'm going to have to put this up because this is important. I don't know if I can. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. No, you can't. 1 second. I will try and move this slide because you need to be able to read this. 1 second while I shift it, because for some reason it's slipped down. Okay. Can you read it now? We asked, could you please provide me with any emergency measures, services and procedures that were undertaken and information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and military personnel during this time this explosion happened? And their response was, no emergency measures, services and procedures were undertaken, as no information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital about this exercise. And that's important because I believe that is the truth. But then they tried to change their story. And this is where the tangled web of the cover-up begins. We went on to ask them, On the 26th of February 2016, a military exercise took place in the area around the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. You stated in a previous Freedom of Information that no notification was given to you. I have since discovered that a large explosion took place sometime after 4 a.m. on the same date. Sometime after this, security were notifying concerned employees and staff at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital that this was an exercise and the hospital services were not required. So as you had no prior notification, could you please answer the following questions? Who notified the hospital by telephone after 4 a.m. on the 26th of February 2016 that the services were not required after the explosion? And who notified the hospital security that this was a result of a military exercise, and how? And then their response was, please accept our apologies for the previous response, but new information has come to light. Really? Okay. We can confirm that the Health Board's Civil Contingencies Manager at the time was notified by South Wales Police in advance of this exercise. Okay. Let's see if I can move this up because it's, all these slides have slipped and I don't know why. I'll just shiver it up a minute so you can read it. And we can confirm that the Health Board Civil Contingencies Manager at the time was notified by South Wales Police in advance of this exercise. Where's it gone? It should be... Oh, here we are. Further to the notification, the switchboard and security were informed of the event and that no involvement would be required. Well, we were pressing them to send us the email because now they're alleging that suddenly they had prior notification. And they went on to say, an email was issued by our Civil Contingencies Manager to all relevant staff at 15:56 on the 12th of February 2016. This included the following extract. South Wales Police have notified me that they'll be conducting 2 counter-terrorism exercises, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. on the 25th and 26th of February, and all day on the 21st of June. Weapon noise and explosions may be heard on the first date, along with increased helicopter activity. On the second date, this has been described to me as a 5-hour gun battle with considerable number of police vehicles and a large number of helicopters landing on a common adjacent to the industrial units opposite the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. This second event will definitely be noticed by the public and staff. Okay, what they're trying to do is mix 2 incidents together, and I called them on it. And I said in your reply, you referred twice to a police counter-terrorism drill and not the military exercise we specifically asked you about. The police counter-terrorism drill took place in June of 2016 and the military exercise took place on the 26th of February 2016. I would like to think there is some confusion on your end and not the idea that perhaps the Trust were trying to deliberately merge these 2 separate exercises as one. We asked you for specific details of the military exercise and not the police counter-terrorism drill. If the Trust were given prior notification of the military exercise in February 2016, can the Trust please provide details of the notification, including date and time? Once again, they apologise for any confusion caused by our previous response to your information request. To clarify, the Health Board's Civil Contingencies Manager at the time was notified by South Wales Police. They have taken an extract from the email, please see below. Now, I'm not a computer genius, but even I can type in a different colour font. That is not the email that we asked them for. We asked them to provide the email. And it goes on to say that there is no mention of a military exercise. We have used the wording from the email.